Hello. I've been experimenting with loom knitting lately, and I wanted to show you how I've been making these cute little scrunchies. They took me between 20 and 60 minutes each. I've got 3 easy tutorials today. That's a small, medium, and large size. I'll also show you how I use multiple strands and change colors. All you need for these scrunchies is some yarn, a round loom, a yarn hook and needle, scissors, and some elastic. We'll start off with the most basic small one colored, 1 yarn scrunchie. I'm using a regular chunky yarn and a small 7-inch diameter round loom. To start, knot your yarn around the anchor peg. If you don't have a peg, don't worry about it. You can just leave a little tail there, and you're gonna put the yarn on the inside of the loom and start wrapping it around each peg from the inside around the middle of the peg. Now, the first few pegs in the first row, you wanna do a little bit loosely, so not pulling super tight. Once you get all the way around, you continue and do another row of loops around each peg above the first, but this time you're going to pull them nice and tight and hold the yarn firm. After you've done 2 rows, wrap the end of the yarn around the anchor peg, or just hold it tight in place. Grab your hook and take the bottom loop on the first peg and pull it up over the top loop and top of the peg. Do the same thing on the next peg and continue all the way around. Once you get all the way around, you'll have done 2 rows. Push the remaining loop on each peg a little bit lower down to make room for another row. I find this easier to do from the inside, and then you gently pull the yarn tight and continue with your 3rd row, just like the second, nice and tight. Then pull the 2nd row of loops over the 3rd and the pegs with your hook. Push them down and continue. When your stitches are twice as long as you want the width of your scrunchie, I did 5 rows of stitches total for the small one, push them down so we have room to fold it over. You're going to undo the original anchored piece of yarn if you anchored it and if you haven't done so, and then grab the bottom row of stitches, the first row we did, and bring it up on the inside of the loom. Tuck the loose tail end of the yarn inside as you hook each bottom stitch back onto the pegs above the last row of loops, making a tube. Make sure you're grabbing the very bottom row, and don't worry if you don't line it up perfectly the first time, because you can always go back and fix it and adjust things before we cast off the loom. To cast off the loom, this is the easiest way I found to do it. You need enough yarn to go all the way around the loom and then some. Cut the yarn that length and thread it through a yarn needle, and use the needle to weave the end of the yarn up under both rows of stitches on the first peg of the loom and pull it through. Then do the next peg, and at this point you can take those stitches off the loom. Keep weaving under the stitches on each peg one at a time and remove them from the loom. When you get to the end and the scrunchie is off the loom, you can pull the end tighter to make it smaller or stretch it out to make it larger if you'd like. Tie the end of the yarn in a double knot around a stitch. Trim the ends and tuck it inside the scrunchie. For the elastic, I used a thin flat one and measured out enough to go around my wrist plus a little extra, and used the yarn needle to string it through the inside of the scrunchie while holding on to the end of it. Make sure you bring the elastic back out the same hole you went in. Tie the ends of elastic in a knot, trim the ends, tuck it back inside, subscribe to my channel, and that's the small scrunchie. If the elastic is too short or too long for your hair, you can always change it, or if it doesn't feel strong enough, you can double up the elastic inside. For the medium-sized scrunchie, I used a larger 9-inch diameter loom and tripled up 3 strands of thinner yarn to thicken it up. For the most part, I did everything the same as the first tutorial, but used 3 different color yarns together as one piece. Doubling and tripling your yarn makes it stronger and much less stretchy, so make sure to do the first row wrapped around the pegs a little looser. For this size, I did 7 rows of stitches, and I find odd numbers the best for scrunchies because even numbers of stitches lay more flat on top of each other, so they look much fuller with odd numbers. When you've done enough stitches, tuck the start of the yarn inside as you hook each bottom stitch back onto the pegs from the inside, making a tube just like the first scrunchie. Measure out at least enough yarn to go all the way around the loom and thread it through the needle to cast off. I started just like the last one, and then I decided to weave it differently this time, putting the end of the yarn through the loops on each peg from the top instead of from the bottom. Then once a few pegs are done, I started to pull them off the loom. I like the way this cast off method looks better than the first one, but it's a little annoying to do because the loom gets in the way. After it's off the loom, knot the end of your yarn and tuck it inside. String some elastic through the inside. I used a thinner, stretchier elastic for this one, but I doubled it up to make it more sturdy. Tie the elastic together through the same hole and tuck it in. If you find it loose, re-knotting the elastic tighter is really easy. For the last large scrunchie, I'll go back to one piece of chunky yarn and show you how I switch colors. My cat decided to join me, even though he never ever sits here, and he was super rude. Okay, large scrunchies. I used the same 9-inch diameter loom and did 9 rows of stitches total, 3 of each color. Start with any color and do the first 3 rows of stitches exactly like the first tutorial. When you finish pulling the second row over the third on each peg, push the yarn loops down and pull the end of the yarn tight inside the loom. Trim the yarn but leave a few inches to make the next knot easier. Take your next color of yarn and double knot the end of it to the yarn you just cut, but do your best to tie the knot as close to the peg as possible so it stays inside the loom when you continue wrapping the next row of stitches. Trim the ends and continue knitting with the new color like nothing happened. I did 3 more rows of stitches before switching to my last color the exact same way. And after I had 9 stitches total, I cast the scrunchie off the loom just like I did the medium scrunchie. I pulled the yarn a little tighter on this one before doing the final double knot to make it a little more scrunched up. Then I used doubled up thicker elastic on the inside so it would be sturdy enough to hold my hair without having to double it over. Experiment with different sizes and elastics because everyone's hair needs different things. Here are the scrunchies from these tutorials next to each other. But you can use different yarn and more stitches for different looks. Here are some different ones that I made. This yellow one is 9 rows of extra chunky blanket yarn. The pink sparkly one is 11 rows of chunky blanket yarn. The tri-colored one is 12 rows of chunky yarn, which is why it's kind of flat like a disc. The solid gray one is 9 rows of chunky yarn, exactly the same size as the large tri-colored scrunchie from the last tutorial. And then we have our medium size from the second tutorial, 7 rows of stitches, and the first small one, 5 rows. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate all of you. Please let me know if you enjoyed this video or if you have any questions or comments. Mwah. Rude.